And welcome to the Rates and Lanes podcast. I'm your host, Rico Muhammad. Not going to be joined. My co-host is right there underneath me, Mr. Chuck Snow. He's right there.
Yeah,
And
Rico.
tonight, our show contributor and special guest joins us again. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about freight markets and everything. But Dean Croke
Mm,
from DAT is joining us. But we uh, want to expand the topic. Also, we're going to touch on the freight markets. But tonight's show is very important, something that is kind of near and dear to all of us, I think. And we're
mm,
going to talk about a little bit the importance of sleep. We didn't even know that Dean was a sleep expert. And so we're going to tap
mm.
into a little bit of his expertise when it comes to the area of sleep and the importance of sleep. So,
Yep.
but with that being said, we're gonna toss it over to Dean real quickly and let him kind of give us a market update on the flatbed, reefers, and dry vans to see how the market is
Mm.
performing, and
Yeah.
also fuel prices.
Thanks, Rico. Good to be with you guys again. I love being on the show just to
We love
share some
having
of
you,
the
man.
information. Yeah, this is. I was talking about. I was at the Freight Fest conference in Houston over the weekend, and so like 500 to 600 people there, and they gave me the opportunity to talk about the sleep subject and the freight market, and also to give a big shout out to the show. So anybody listening in from the Freight Fest event in Houston, welcome to the show. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll look forward to you being a regular listener each week. There are a bunch of people that are very interested in listening in this week about this very subject of sleep because it's such as I said during my session on Saturday in Houston, it's probably the most important information you'll ever learn, but it's the most important information not taught in school. And which, when you sort of understand the physiology of sleep, and from a trucker's perspective, you would say, yeah, this should be a mandatory class. But interesting things in the freight market. Let's get the show started with some of the things that we're seeing in the freight market. A little bit of seasonality emerges. You guys know what seasonality means. It means that the market's exhibiting some of its normal seasonal forces that we'd expect this time of the year. Spot rates have dropped dramatically in the spot market. Contract rates are holding their own, I would say, maybe a little bit of downward pressure. And I think that's the biggest story. 90% of the freight's moving on the contract market at the moment, 10% on spot. Spot's taken a hammering, but contract market's holding its own. I will say, though, that for those of the carriers that are listening that are in the contract market, new rates coming into routing guides. So carriers are doing a lot of rebidding. They're going back to shippers and rebidding last year's contracts to try and secure more volume on lanes. Those rates are coming in 8 to 12% lower. Yes, the rates are coming in lower than they were last year. So shippers are clawing back some of those gains. The decrease in rates in the contract side are more pronounced in refrigerated than dry van. Obviously, refrigerator is not as big a part of the industry, but it's heavily driven by a lot of seasonality too when it comes to produce and Thanksgiving, like turkey volume. So, spot rates. If we just talk about spot rates, then spot rates are have kind of flatlined this week, which is again good news. They're down almost like $1 a mile since the start of the year, which is the really bad news. And of course, diesel's gone up a bunch since then. But we expect spot rates to remain flat for the rest of the year. What you can expect, though, in the next 2 weeks is some inflationary pressure on spot rates. Normally, this time of the year, volumes in the spot market and rates increase through Thanksgiving. They increase more so in refrigerated because you'll start to see a lot more volume of fresh turkeys, frozen turkeys, and various meats coming out of the meat patch in the Midwest. So some of those volumes you're already seeing in the Midwest. Rates are pretty good on some of those Midwest lanes, mainly out of Minneapolis, which is the biggest turkey producing state in the country by a long way, followed by North Carolina. So you'll see some pretty, Minnesota's another one, Missouri. So you'll see pretty good fresh turkey volume, coming out of those markets. If you can get there without too many deadhead miles, there'll be some really good value on some of those fresh turkey lanes in particular in the next 3 weeks. So keep an eye on that one. Produce season's pretty ordinary in Florida. It's delayed again. There's another hurricane or a storm about to hit, so it's going to delay things even more. We talked to some growers down there this week. The produce season so next year's produce season really unofficially starts in Florida right now when they start planting strawberries. You've got a big berry season that starts there that runs from November through April. They're about a week delayed, but they're pretty optimistic they'll still get their plantings in, which means we still should see peak volumes early next year start with the next year's produce season out of Florida, which will be good news for reefer carriers. Flatbed, real horror show. Like it's interesting today. I don't know if you saw the news that in Chicago the futures for lumber futures, which, if I get this right, it's a lumber future is a rail carload of lumber delivered in Prince Rupert, I think it is. Like, it's like a 90-ton carload. That's what a lumber future is. And it was $433 per 1,000 board feet for the lumber future contract, the Ford contract. A year ago, it was, I think, around $1,510 per 1,000 board feet. So this was
25.
Yeah, this is March last year. So remember, lumber prices were through the roof last year.
Yes,
during the building boom.
Right.
This year that they dropped away last year, they picked back up again. They're down about 62% this year to $433. Here's the rub: if you still go to Lowe's and Home Depot, you're still going to pay a lot of money for dimension framing lumber that a lot of flatbed carriers have already hauled. So you're still paying very high prices. But the news this week from West Fraser Timber, the biggest manufacturer or producer of lumber in British Columbia. British Columbia produces about a third of the volume that the US market, uses for housing, and a lot of flatbed carriers will run out of British Columbia and Seattle, Washington, all over the country with flatbed loads. The news this week was that some of the rates are so low for lumber that they're talking about shutting down production lines and sawmills going out of business, which is really bad news, because normally in winter, flatbed carriers stock up a lot of inventory of lumber for next spring's sales. So lumber is typically a peak production period for sawmills and a lot of activity for flatbed carriers. That doesn't look like happening because the housing market is so depressed at the moment because of high building prices and high, interest rates and all those sorts of things. So flatbed carriers not going to be, it's normally a quiet time of the year anyway. So we're seeing rates have flatlined. I can give you the numbers this week. Dry van was about $1.75 a mile this week. That's excluding fuel. Right. So that's a national average of $1.75. That's down 77 cents a mile compared to this time last year. Right. So that's a huge drop. Refrigerated national average excluding fuel. There's a fuel surcharge this week was 68 cents. So you'd add that onto the top of this. Refrigerated was $2.06 a mile, excluding fuel, 95 cents a mile lower than this time last year. And flatbed was the same at $2.06, and it's about 58 cents a mile lower than this time last year. So rates have come way off in spot, in flatbed, dry van, and reefer. Again, I don't think any of us are surprised that happened, given where they were this time last year. We all were talking about on the show that they were sort of unsustainably high. But so rates have come back down. I will say to you that rates look very much like they did in 2018. Again, very, very, very similar to 2018. Admittedly, 2018 was a great first half. The second half of 2018 was not so good because the market was already in the downslide period, and then it went into 2019 when we had a pretty ordinary year. But the difference this year, people say, well, why are spot rates dropping? We got way too many trucks on the road compared to loads in the spot market in particular. And if we look at the number of trucks posting their equipment on our load boards, which is kind of a proxy for capacity in the spot market, it's when a carrier posts their truck looking for a load. The volumes of carriers doing that are almost identical to 2019 levels for November, which of course was, the sort of the back end of that really bad year. So if you think about the spot market, contract market, I think is very strong. Rates are good. Shippers have never been paying more because of the fuel surcharge. Volumes are very strong. Spot market, though, is a very different story. Volumes look like 2018. Capacity looks like 2019, which is why you've got too many trucks for the loads in the spot market and rates decreasing. So the biggest story is spot peak season has already been and gone. When you look at the import volumes, we saw import volumes peak in July this year. They've been decreasing ever since. And the data that's just out today, for those that, in the drayage and port market, import volumes flat in October. They've just come out today. They were flat last month, but they're down. They're down about 11% year over year. So they're definitely decreasing. The story though that was very interesting was the Global Port Tracker did their forecast for November, December import volumes, and for the first time, guys, import container volumes. This is the number of 20-foot containers will drop below 2 million in November for the first time in 28 months.
Wow.
Now, why is that important? Well,
That's significant.
2 million containers. The head of Global Georgia Ports said 2 years ago, when the US supply chain imports more than 2 million containers a month, it starts to get into trouble. It starts to get backlogged, congested. You start to see supply chain disruptions. So we've been over 2 million containers a month for 28 months, which is why we've had supply chain disruptions. For some reason, we don't have a supply chain infrastructure that can handle the sort of volume we've been pumping through it at such irregular levels. And but this is the first time we'll come back to under 2 million in November. So when people talk about the supply chain starting to return to normal, lower import volumes are a big reason why that it gives people the breathing space to clear the backlogs. So for people that are listening, they're in the dray community, you can expect lower volumes, but more fluidity, if that's the right word. People will be able to start to move things quicker. And for those that are in the asset space, you should be able to find less delays for those deliveries that have been held up in ports. So that's kind of the freight market update this week. Lots happening. So lots of good. It's a great time to be in freight. It always is. If you know your operating costs, they are way up right now. So
unfortunately, for a lot of the new entrants that immediately gravitated towards the low-hanging fruit, the spot market, they're going to be stuck with when the music stops with no chair, and that's what's happening.
So I guess that's a good segue to talk about our sort of feature subject this week. And this is what I did this at the Freight Fest conference. I said to the group, I could sit here and talk about freight rates and spot market and costs, but I think what I'd rather do is spend 20 minutes teaching you some things that might save your life. Because
before we jump into it, though, Dean, let me do a little bit of housekeeping real quickly. I'm gonna drop over into the chat a link if you got a question or if you want to comment. I'm gonna drop the link over in the chat. You can come up and on board, and we welcome your question and your input. There's no such thing as a dumb question. The other part is if you're watching us on YouTube or anything else, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Like, share, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And with that being said, I'm throwing it right back over to Dean. All right, Dean, you can pick right back up on the
No, good point, Rico. I should have thought about that. Drop your questions in there. We can handle the questions live. We can see them as they come in. One of the things that we were talking before the show, I did a few million miles as a driver and did it all the wrong way. Not at the time I didn't know I was doing it the wrong way, but nobody ever really taught you how to sleep. They just said, you've got to make a mile and do the best you can.
You were rewarded for bad behavior.
Well, we were, and we were paid really well for it too. So we were incentivized. But the thing was, no one was ever, you were taught you're sort of left to your own devices to get whatever sleep you could, and it was kind of almost by accident that it happened. And it was, growing up in Australia, where I was a very hot country and very hard to sleep in the day in hot trucks without APUs or any air conditioning. So it's almost impossible to get sleep during the day. Even at night, it was a problem because of humidity and mosquitoes, because we didn't have the kind of technology we do today with APUs and, engines that are more in tune with idling throughout the night to keep the trucks cool. So we made a lot of mistakes. I used to fall asleep for a living driving trucks at night. When I think back at it, I used to always drive with the window down and the engine brake on, so that there'd be, if I fell asleep, my foot came off the gas, the engine brake would come on, and I'd wake up. What a crazy way to live your life, right? But this happened every night, and I didn't really know any better, and I didn't know how much risk I was taking until I decided to get out of that. Get out of driving, and after losing a couple of drivers, And I decided to get out of trucking and go into the other side of trucking, which is working for different organizations that especially in the sleep science space, that could help drivers understand the science of sleep. I ended up working for Circadian Technologies here in Boston, who brought us over to this country from Australia to work in this particular space. And it was staggering to learn the science of sleep from an academic perspective at Harvard, and then apply that to what I knew from the road, how sleep deprivation felt, how starting work at different times of the day felt. But the realization was that a lot of the stuff that we did on the road was completely preventable. And it didn't mean we do less miles. In fact, it meant we do more miles. And that to me was the biggest takeaway from this, was that we didn't need to do what we were doing in the 80s and 90s to stay awake. If we just knew how to sleep and the science of sleep, and maybe had bosses that were a little bit more conciliatory when it came to, basic human needs, we'd probably have a lot more people alive today. And I studied the subject. One of the biggest things I figured out, I was sitting at an airport in Chicago at Midway one day, and I just thought, we're teaching the wrong thing. We're asking drivers to be compliant to hours of service, yet we never teach them how to be well rested on the 10-hour break. We don't equip them with any skills. We say to drivers, have your 10-hour break. We expect you to be ready to go after 10 hours.
Right.
And of course, the reality is you can't. We did studies on this, guys, that showed that if you have a 10-hour break during the day, daylight, at best, you'll get 4.5 hours sleep. Now, if that 10-hour break happened at night, you'd get more like 7.5. And it's got a lot to do with, how our bodies are designed. So, maybe some of the education we can share tonight is sort of around the basic physiology. But we're designed to sleep during the night and wake during the day. It's the sunrise, and in particular, the blue light in the light spectrum, that wakes our brain up. So when your brain sees blue light at sunrise, that's your optic nerve connection to your body clock in the base of the brain that says, hey, another day's here, time to wake up, time to fire up and get going. Now, of course, if you're driving through sunrise and you're getting a big healthy dose of sunlight, and you're at the 10th, 11th hour, and you pull over and you're going to have your 10-hour break at, say, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning after the body's already been told another day's here, you put your head down. Now, sheer exhaustion will probably put you to sleep for about 3 hours. But because you've been drinking caffeine all night, you'll be getting up to go to the bathroom, and then you'll go back to sleep maybe for another hour and a half. And this scenario plays out across the shift worker world, whether it's mining or trucking. The human brain behaves almost identical given a certain pattern of work. So what you'll hear is, you guys would have known this when you would be driving. You'd have a 10-hour break. You're ready to go. You're wide awake, but you can't because 10 hours hasn't elapsed. So you often see this scenario where drivers are saying, hey, I feel like I can drive. I'm wide awake, but I've got to wait this 10-hour period. And the reality is that in any 10-hour period during the day, you just don't get enough sleep. That's because the body is designed to be awake, during the day and sleeping at night. So that's the light cues that we get. And that's why drivers have such problems with irregular schedules. Carriers have often said to me, what's the most important thing we can do for our drivers? And I said, start work at the same time every day. Right. It's the most critical thing by far, because if you start work at the same time, by default, your sleep is at the same time every day. And the human body has an inbuilt drive for anchor sleep, same time every day. So if you lock in the start time, you will lock in the sleep pattern. And that's incredibly hard to do in an over-the-road environment where you've got different appointment times. But if you've got the choice of when to start work, a consistent start time will make the world of difference to how you feel. In fact, some progressive companies do what we call biocompatible scheduling, where you design the driver's schedule around their sleep patterns, which again sounds absolutely crazy, right?
No,
but
sounds brilliant.
I know it is. It's called biocompatible scheduling. And when you do it, what you'll find is drivers will run about 10% more miles per week. Now, it's only about 60 miles per day more, but that's how it works. Sorry, Rico.
I've got a question for you, Dean. And I'm not sure if you may be able to answer it or not, but this is what has popped in my mind. And I know that other drivers probably have felt the same way. Sometimes I have personally have been in a situation where years ago, I have slept, I thought pretty good, got up, got behind the wheel, and man, I couldn't even make it down the road 3 hours or so before I was just like, man, I'm just tired as all get out. And then I've had days where I've only got a couple of hours of sleep and I can drive
go all day. Yeah. Well, so that's a really good observation, Rico, because it's got to do with the timing of sleep. So we've all been tricked into thinking that that more is better, that sleep is linear. The more hours we get, the better we are. In fact, that's completely incorrect. I'll give you a quick example that 6 hours is better than 7. Right. Now that's going to sound really counterintuitive, but it gets to why some days you can go well and others you can't. It's got to do with sleep inertia. And sleep inertia is like a fog that hangs in your brain all day. And think about, so let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a 1 hour nap and woken up feeling worse?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Have you ever woken half an hour before your alarm clock?
Yep.
Right. So in those two cases, what's happening is a normal sleep cycle is what we call an ultradian cycle of 90 minutes, 90, about an hour and a half. So the human brain sleeps in blocks of an hour and a half, typically. Mine's an hour and 24 minutes. Some people are an hour and 35. The average is about an hour and a half. And in an hour and a half period, you go through light sleep, deep sleep. So you'll go through lighter stages of sleep. And then after about 25, 30 minutes, you drift off into deep sleep. And then you'll be in deep sleep for about 45, 50 minutes. And then you'll wake up and finish the REM cycle with a dream. Right. So that's a 90-minute period where you go light sleep, light sleep, dream. Now, the quality of the sleep comes from each sleep stage. Light sleep deals with memory, mood, more memory, vigilance, cognition. That's why a short power nap really recharges the brain for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then you drop off into deep sleep. Now, in deep sleep, your brain goes into, you're dead to the world. You're unconscious, but your body is tossing and turning. So if you've seen someone in bed tossing and turning, they're in deep sleep, right? Because what's happening is the human growth hormone gets released during the deep sleep brainwave pattern, and it fixes the physical fatigue, the skin, the hair, the bones, the muscles, right? But as you come out at about the 75-minute mark out of that sleep cycle, you get to a REM cycle where the brain goes into rapid eye movement. And rapid eye movement is where the body goes into a state of paralysis, the opposite of deep sleep, and your brain starts buzzing with electricity and you're dreaming. So remember, deep sleep is body's tossing and turning, brain's unconscious. At the end of a sleep cycle, the brain is buzzing with electricity and dreaming, processing all of the memory, mood, emotion, but your body's completely paralyzed so you don't act out your dreams. So that's a 90-minute stage of sleep. So deep sleep fixes the physical fatigue, REM sleep fixes the brain. So let me ask that question again. Where does 1 hour nap take you in the 1.5 hour sleep cycle? Right in the bottom of deep sleep when the brain is dead to the world. And when you try and wake up at a 1 hour mark from deep sleep, you wake up with what's called sleep inertia. And sleep inertia takes a normal person about 30 minutes to kick out of their brain. And then they get going and feel better. Now, for truckers who are sleep deprived, that sleep inertia is severe. If you have a 1 hour nap and wake up with sleep inertia as a trucker, that will stay in your brain like a fog all day. And that's why, Rico, you find it hard to make a mile some days because it depends on the timing of sleep. So that 1 hour nap, if you'd let that 1 hour nap go to an hour and a half, your brain would have automatically been awake and you would have got all of the components of sleep architecture that give you good quality sleep. So naps are 20 to 30 minutes or an hour and a half, right?
Nothing
So that's the basic building block of good quality sleep. So you avoid a 1 hour nap where you feel worse, make it an hour and a half, you'll already be wide awake, right? And the other one is the reason you're waking a half an hour before your alarm clock is you've got your alarm clock set for the bottom of deep sleep in the next sleep cycle because your brain was waking you half an hour earlier at the end of the prior sleep cycle when you were dreaming. And if you think about what's this tonight, you will wake every hour and a half, pretty much routinely. And once you get over age 43 to 45, sleep becomes very fragmented, and you will be awake for periods of time during the night. But what you'll find is it's about every hour and a half that you'll be waking up. Then you'll drift off again and wake up, drift off again, wake up. And the key is not to stress about this, is just to realize that sleep is cumulative. And if you get multiple blocks of an hour and a half, you'll actually feel much better and run more miles.
So is this a phenomenon for truck drivers strictly, or is this just in general for the general public?
Everybody, every single person on the planet, we're all the same. So predicting sleep is one of the easiest things we've ever been able to do, because there's not a lot of inputs. It's sunrise, sunset, and a few social cues, and your time zone locks you into a sleep-wake cycle. It's why it's called a circadian rhythm. And once you get sunlight at the same time every day, what it does is it locks in your sleep cycle. The reality is, though, that we've got hours of service that applied to each of us, and our body clocks are aging rapidly. By the time you go from age 20 to age 50, the amount of minutes of deep sleep you get drops by 50%. So you're not getting as much deep sleep as you get older. You're not getting as much REM sleep as you get older. Your sleep quality decreases. Your sleep efficiency decreases. So for drivers, anybody for that matter, the older you get, the harder you've got to work at sleep. So you've got to really give yourself time to sleep in blocks of an hour and a half. So that's why I say to people, count cycles, not hours. So a lot of us will say, I'm going to go to bed and have 7 hours sleep. No, have 4 sleep cycles, 4 hour and a half sleep cycles, which is 6 hours. And you can't, so sleep is in blocks of an hour and a half. So it's an hour and a half, 3, 4.5 hours, 6 hours, 7.5, 9. You're putting your head down in the bunk. Always think about blocks of an hour and a half and set your alarm clock for sort of multiples of an hour and a half. And what you'll find is you'll automatically be waking at the end of a dream anyway. And you'll actually feel much better because you won't be waking with that sleep inertia that hangs in the brain like a fog. Right. So that's the key to getting good quality sleep. Comes from cycles, not hours. And that's probably the most important thing I ever understood from this, was that I'd been doing it all wrong, because I thought it was about the more hours I got, the better it was.
I think everybody thinks that. You know what? I think that's probably the information that most of us, till we hear this, really believes. Because we're taught that actually at North American schools, that kids are taught you need 8 or 10 hours a night sleep. Right. That's what we are taught. Which isn't very much, and it's the wrong information anyways.
Well, for kids, interesting, kids need, like a newborn baby needs 18 hours a day, right? A teenager probably needs 10. By the time you get into your teenage years, 7.5 to, adult years, 7.5 to 8 is probably about where you need to be. But the problem, one of the things I said in Houston at Freight West was, never wake a sleeping teenager. And it's got to do with what you just mentioned, Chuck, which is, a lot of people have got teenagers that want to have a sleep marathon on weekends. And for a lot of drivers out there on the road, this is incredibly stressful when you've got problems at home and teenage children that, are not sleeping properly, and you've got all sorts of frustration and stress, and you're headed in the wrong direction and a long way from home. It's very hard to deal with. So that's why all of my sleep classes I always had spouses and teenagers involved, because the spouses and teenagers manage the driver's sleep schedule at home. And unless you involve them in that, it's very hard for the driver to have a nap at 2:30 on Saturday afternoon for an hour and a half and not be called lazy, and not be, made do chores or go out and be felt guilty for. Because a lot of people in society look at sleep as a sign of laziness.
Yes.
Whereas it's not. It's actually a sign of, I would say, brilliance. Like, it's a sign of people that are very clever, very smart, very well rested. And I can use the example of a teenager, right, and sleep debt, because I think this gets to why truckers are so fatigued and sleep deprived over time. It grinds them into the ground. So think about a teenager. Chuck, you mentioned that a teenager that, let's say they need 10 hours. Now, during puberty, a teenager, their body clock shifts 3 hours during puberty. So that means that if they were a 10-year-old going to bed at 9, during puberty, it shifts to midnight. So they'll delay sleep 3 hours. And the problem a lot of parents have is they'll think this is behavioral. They think it's something wrong with their parenting because their children won't go to sleep, that they're poorly behaved. This is purely physiology. The kids' brains won't, the sleep gate won't open until midnight. Used to open at 10, now it's 11, now then it's 12. So what happens is if you need 10 and you go to bed at midnight and then you still got to get up at 6 to catch the school bus, how many hours have you lost? You lost 4 hours sleep. And it's cumulative, guys. If you do this 5 days a week, it's 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. So by the time you get to Saturday morning, teenagers have typically got a sleep debt of 20 hours rattling around in their brains. And the myth is that if I have a 20-hour sleep debt, I need 20 extra hours on the weekend to catch up. And that's incorrect. All the human brain needs is two good periods of night sleep. It's all it needs. If you give the brain 2 periods of night sleep, it will dispense the sleep debt from the previous week. And so that's why teenagers want to have a sleep marathon on Saturday and Sunday, because they're trying to pay back the sleep debt. And what do you think parents do to them on Saturday morning?
Get them up at 6 o'clock to do chores or play hockey or a multitude of things.
Because they think sleep is laziness. And that's why you have so much trouble at home. And I asked people in the audience on Saturday in Houston, and to a person, they all still do it. And they said, well, we're not going to do it anymore. But it explains a lot of the conflict, because kids are dog tired. They just want to get some catch up sleep. And I said, let the kids sleep in. When they're done sleeping, then talk about all the things you want to talk about, but change all your schedules. You can't expect kids to have good grades and make good decisions if they're constantly sleep deprived. So let's translate that to truckers. And you'll remember the hours of service regulations were redesigned a few years ago to include 2 periods a night between 1 and 5 a.m. This was what they were trying to get at, because the science was very clear that said that you need 2 periods of night sleep back to back to get rid of the sleep debt from the previous week. So if you're a truck driver and you lose, a couple of hours sleep a night, and you've got a sleep debt on the weekend, and you only have 1 period of night sleep on a 34-hour restart, what happens is whatever sleep debt you didn't dispense carries over to the next week. It's cumulative. And this isn't the fatigue of 5 a.m. falling asleep at the wheel. This is cumulative fatigue that grinds you into the ground. It makes you look 10 years older than you are by the time you're done. And what happens is if you don't get 2 periods of night sleep every 7, you might have a sleep debt of 10 hours every week. By the time you get 90, 120 days into this job, it's a grind, because the sleep deprivation catches up with you. And it's no coincidence that the peak in driver turnover is about 90 days, because that's about how long cumulative fatigue takes to grind you into the ground. Because if you've been a person that slept at night every night of your life, and then you suddenly jump into a truck and you're sleeping at all different times of the day and night, that's why cumulative fatigue starts to hurt you. So my golden rules are: never wake a sleeping teenager, but more importantly, sleep in cycles of an hour and a half. Try and get 6 hours sleep every 24 hours if you can. Supplement it with naps, and just as importantly, get 2 periods of night sleep every 7, and that will make the world a difference to you. Now, the other thing is napping is your body's designed to sleep twice a day. Once is bedtime at night, and the other is in the middle of the afternoon. That's why it's called a siesta in Latin cultures. And it's about 8 hours after you wake. And if you start to study this, you'll find it's like clockwork. About 8 hours after you wake, your body tries to put you to sleep. Now, the catch is in the middle of the afternoon, it's a very small window of time that only is open for about 20 minutes. And a lot of truckers will experience this, where they'll be driving down the interstate and they'll get tired and start to scratch and fidget and think, I'm going to need to find a parking bay and pull over and put my head down. Of course, by the time you get into the parking bay and put your head down, what's happened?
You've already good. You're ready to go.
You're wide awake. So the key is, if you know when your post-lunch circadian dip is, and mine is 2:34 p.m. like clockwork. If you know that's when it is, you find a parking bay before that, and you get into bed and you have your hour and a half or your half-hour nap, and then you go again. But if you miss that little window, your alertness curve picks up all the way through the early part of the evening before you go to sleep again. So if you miss that window in the afternoon, it's very hard to sleep at any other time, because the alertness curve is going to keep you ramped up. So napping, napping. You've got the napping cues, setting your alarm clock at multiples an hour and a half, sleeping in the afternoons, and having 2 periods of night sleep every 7. And that's kind of all based around that physiology that that the body is sort of designed with when we're born.
So for people kind of like and even a lot of companies, freight companies, for instance, classic example, move majority of their freight at night.
Yep.
Probably the most productive time if you're driving to drive it. Less traffic, less congestion, things of that nature. You can get to you can get it much easier to maneuver around. What kind of an effect is that having on us drivers that are operating on those?
So it's a great question, and the reality is you can get used to it. You can switch your body to driving at night if it's at exactly the same time every day, and you get sunrise at the same time every day, and you're home in bed at the same time every day. So routine is absolutely critical. And I think, Rico, there's a lot of guys that do, line runs in the P&D LTL business. Not P&D.
Right.
They'll do line runs. They'll go out, 5 hours, come back 5 hours. I can tell you, having done that work, that's the hardest gig of all, is, a day cab doing line runs at night in LTL. That's a hard gig, because a lot of the times you're out late and you're coming back through sunrise, and you're battling peak hour traffic on the way back into your home base. That's a really tough life. But what I do know that is if you and I've taught a lot of fleets, in particular fleets like Dayton Freight, who are a massive LTL operation in the Midwest. I've taught every one of their drivers and every one of their terminals throughout the country on the science of sleep. And we integrated sleep scheduling into their operation, right from the manager of every terminal all the way down to the forklift drivers. And if you start to do that, what you're building into the business is consistency. They're not holding drivers over. They make sure they leave at the same time every night. They're back at the same time every morning. And the drivers, at home, the drivers know to have fully darkened curtains. They know to stop drinking caffeine, within 6 hours of bedtime, because it's got a half-life of 6 hours. They know to have the temperature at 65 degrees at home. Their spouses know not to wake them before 6 hours. So if you have routine, you can actually build a lot of resilience into night driving. You can actually do this if you do it properly. Now, I will say that your sleep quality in the day, Rico, is not as good as sleep at night. There's no question that your sleep is very different if you sleep during the day. But if you get the same routine, the same schedule, the same environment, and you've got a very solid routine at home when you're running line runs at night, you will find you'll have to have naps on the weekend to play catch up. But what the smart drivers do is they stay on the same schedule 7 days a week.
Right.
Because you can't switch the body quick enough from, driving nights and then trying to have 2 days off and sleep at night. Because by the time Sunday night rolls around, you've switched your body back to sleeping at night. And the first night back, you're actually awake all day. You're awake 24 hours. You're awake 24 hours by the time you finish your first night, Monday night.
I laugh because I've been in that situation before.
Exactly.
I think everybody has. And, there's a lot of industries and services that push for that. They have employees. I have a young friend of mine who's a police officer, and she works 4 days on, 4 days off. On her 4 days on, 2 of them are night and 2 of them are day.
Awful. Just awful.
It's just,
I
don't know how she does it.
It's called rapid flip-flopping. If you flip-flop schedules, that's because what they're trying to do is share the risk.
Right.
They're trying to share the pain around. I understand why they do it. But I'll give you an example of what we did at Dupre Logistics, one of my, best companies I ever worked for in Lafayette, Louisiana. They run about, I don't know, probably 700-800 trucks now. They have 2.38 drivers for every truck. To give you a sense of how heavily optimized this business is, they're running something like 138, 140 hours a week out of every truck. They run that thing nonstop, and they're one of the safest companies on the planet. They're a model company in how you manage fatigue risk in transportation. But what we did is, because in a business where tenure is important, your newest drivers with the least experience tend to get the worst trucks and the worst shift. which is the worst thing you could possibly do.
because you won't keep them.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite of what you should do. So what we did is we said, you know what, let's try and find out what sleep preferences the drivers have got. And we did a thing called a morningness eveningness quiz, where we found out the driver's sleep personality. And what we did is we put as many night owls as we could on night shift, and as many morning larks as we could on morning shift. Right. And the reality is that only 15% of the population are hardwired night owls. That means they can stay up till 2, 3 in the morning without any problem. But, they'll sleep during the day pretty easily. Another 15 to 20% of the folks are morning larks. They can get up at 3, 4 in the morning, no problem whatsoever, but they got to be in bed by 7 to 8 o'clock at night.
Right.
Then there's a bunch of us in the middle, like 70, 75% of us that are what we call intermediate sleep types, where we can go to bed at 10, get up at 6, maybe go to bed at midnight, get up at 8, maybe go to bed at 8, get up at 4. We can move around a little bit, but we can't do night shift all the time, and we can't do morning shift all the time. It'll burn us out. But if you it's called biocompatible scheduling. And when you start to put schedules around people's sleep patterns, what you find is all sorts of good things happen, because people actually are wide awake and working and enjoy it. And Dupre was one of the first companies that ever did this with a high degree of success. And it made them incredibly safer, because you didn't have drivers that were dog tired,
Right. Not having accidents.
mixing gasoline and distillate, because their brains were transposing the numbers on the tanks at the gas station, which a tired brain does. We've all done that sort of stuff. So I think the key is, Rico, to answer. It's a great question, and it's hard to do, but we're all creatures of habit, and if we have a lot of consistency and habits in that night shift work, you can actually do very well driving at nights. But you've got to have the same schedule, same sleep time. You've got to have a lot of routine to make that work.
So now
last time you slightly mentioned, I think it was in our free time, you were talking to Rico and I, you're talking about impairment and lack of sleep. Can you share that with our listeners? Because it really shone a light on things for me personally.
With the alcohol impairment?
No, just with alcohol, with the impairment being sleep deprived. What happens with it? How where you compare lack of sleep with how much alcohol somebody.
Yeah, I think we did touch on it last week. We did this study in 1997. I was at the ATA, and we were building some hours of service regulations. And what we were trying to figure out was, what's an extended workday look like? So we tried to figure out what this whole notion of fatigue looked like once it was starting to become something that people were getting their head around. And what we found was that when we had two populations of students at Adelaide University, one group we kept awake 28 hours, the other group we fed alcohol every 20 minutes. Needless to say, we had no end of folks wanting to join that that group. But this study's been repeated all over the world since. This was an amazing landmark study. What we found is, when we put them on a simulator to simulate the driving skills, the psychomotor skills that you need to drive a truck, we found that 17 hours of sustained wakefulness was exactly the same level of impairment as the group at 0.05 blood alcohol content. And at 24 hours awake, it was 0.10.
Wow.
And I know from some of the double shifts I've worked that you feel like you're drunk when you're driving tired. Like there's a lot of similarities in your levels of impairment. But 17 hours awake was a little bit more interesting to us, because it's not hard to be awake 17 hours when you drive a truck. When you think about current hours of service, you've got a workday of 14 hours before you can't drive.
And it's 3 hours getting to the terminal and getting your and stuff like that beforehand.
Yeah. And that's a little bit of the conundrum when it comes to when we talking back about hours of service and taking a 10-hour break, because for so many people, you run into the scenario of, once now you're on break. You only just got to wind down a little bit before, and before you know it, you may only have 5 hours left out of the 10 hours.
Right. Well, that's why that first night shift back is the most risky, because if you've been awake all day before you start your first night shift, you are 24 hours awake by the time you're at your 12-hour mark in your log. And that's why you see a lot of accidents on that first night back, and particularly first night back last night of the week, because the fatigue catches up with you. So yes, so the 17 hours and 0.05 is a very interesting measure, because we kind of frown on people driving with a high blood alcohol content, but we think nothing of letting people drive tired. I mean, we don't think nothing of it, but we don't think you're breaking the law necessarily when you're tired like that, because there's no objective way to measure it, really, is there?
Right.
You know what the truth is, Dean, Enrico, we really, historically, we have celebrated people that can get by on 2 hours, 3 hours a night sleep. You had a president recently that was bragging about it publicly, and everybody thought, wow, this guy, he's a real true legend. He only needs 2 hours a night sleep.
Well, and then you hear the old well, I know I've heard the old saying, by some of the older people that I've been around, I'll sleep when I'm dead, and
well,
you'll be dead real soon.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating subject. It's like people often ask me how much sleep is best, and I say, well, saying you need 8 hours sleep is like saying everyone should wear a size 8 shoe. It's really each of us are born with a human body clock. It's like our fingerprint. Our biological clock is different for each of us. We're all designed to be, some are short nappers, some are long nappers, some are no nappers, some are short sleepers, some are long sleepers. So we've all got different sleep patterns. And I think that's where some people that, what I do know is that if you get less than 6 hours sleep every 24, there's a whole raft of health problems that come from that. I say to drivers, the minimum you need to get is 6 hours, which is 4 sleep cycles. You can do it in 2 blocks or 3 blocks. Do an hour and a half and then 4.5, do 3 and 3, do 4.5, 1.5, but get 6 hours sleep every 24, and you'll be able to function fairly well. But you will need naps to play catch up. That's absolutely minimum. But 6 hours is the bare minimum. So I hear people say, yeah, I can get by on 4. And I kind of say, yeah, not for long. It'll catch up with you eventually if you don't get.
What effects on your physical health? What areas? Explain to our listeners, because people are like, well, what difference does that make to my blood pressure or my heart or my kidneys or whatever by only getting 5 hours a night or 4 hours a night sleep?
Yeah, good question. Hypertension's a big one. High blood pressure, diabetes. Weight gain is probably the most pervasive, Chuck, because what happens is when you get less than 6 hours sleep a night, there's a drastic change in the hormones that tell you you're full and you're hungry. So when you drop below 6 hours sleep a night, the hormone called ghrelin that tells you to eat increases, and the hormone leptin that tells you you're full decreases. So the less sleep you get, the more signals you get to eat more, and you're full less. So what happens is, as a trucker in particular, when you're looking for high comfort food and you're thinking, I need a break and I'm just going to go in and shovel down some, potatoes and gravy and a burger and something, and I'll get to it tomorrow. I'll change my diet tomorrow. I'll always get around to it, which you never do. What happens is that high fat carbohydrate food, you actually, because you've got a sedentary lifestyle, so you're packing on the calories.
Of course.
And this is it's a really pervasive thing, because what happens is you put on a little bit of weight every day, over the course of a week. We put weight on from the bottom up, so it starts with a spare tire, and it'll gradually work its way up to a lot more fat around the neck, right, in particular. So bottom to the top. You'll notice when someone loses weight, they'll lose it from the neck first, and they look skinny in the face. You lose it from the top down. But by the time it gets to the neck, that's when snoring and the sleep apnea starts to become more evident, because it's the fat around the neck and the weight that presses down on your airways. And that you could be, gasping for air all night. You might be in bed for 8 hours, but you're actually never drifting off into deep sleep, because you're always sort of gasping for air, right? So,
wow. Now, is that because you're lying down, Dean?
Yeah, lying down. Lying down's part of it, but the soft palate in the back of the throat slides back, and all the fat around the neck adds to the collapsibility of the upper airway. So snoring is nothing to do with your nose. It's actually the soft palate flapping as air rushes past. That's what snoring is. It's the flapping of the soft palate back in the throat. Now, what happens with sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea, that soft palate closes off and stops breathing. And you stop breathing for a while, and the brain says, wake up, and it's gasping for air. And for some people, they'll do that every minute of every hour of every night. And so what that does is it puts enormous stress on your heart, gives you hypertension, high blood pressure, affects your mood, your memory, you're sleep deprived, people become suicidal. Depression comes as a result of all of this. So the weight, you asked the question about diet, the diet can lead to a whole lot of unhealthy outcomes. And it's hard to change diet as a trucker. I know that. I wrestled with that for a long time. But it's the unhealthy diet and the weight gain that are probably the biggest enemies of drivers in terms of both their physical and mental health these days. It's just a lifestyle that's not conducive to it. But I do say I see a lot of drivers out there now with their weights and their bike, and they're doing sort of aerobic exercises in the truck park. We need more of that. So there is a way to do it, but unfortunately the choices you get in a truck stop are not particularly conducive.
No, that and an awful lot of drivers now more than ever are bringing food with them, so they can at least have healthier choices available. Because from what I've seen, anytime I'm in a truck stop, the food is despicable. At least before, years ago, when I was driving full time, there were these small mom and pop truck stops that actually made. It probably wasn't healthy food. It was, hot beef sandwiches and hot turkey sandwiches, but it was, at least it wasn't your fast food. It was, it wasn't, and no offense to anybody, but, KFC and things like this, that is so abundant in the truck stops now.
Right. That's if they're open. I think the other thing I learned, that we in the time we've got left, that was one of the more life-saving things, other than, getting 2 periods of night sleep every 7, sleeping in blocks of an hour and a half, making sure you set your alarm clock properly, getting 6 hours sleep, 4 sleep cycles every day, was understanding the physiology of the head nod. I didn't realize what the head nod was, because I, like most drivers, thought when my head nodded, that was the sleep. It was only for a split second and nothing bad happened, so I'll keep driving. And I used to do that repeatedly every single night. Now, what happens physiologically is, though, when you go to sleep, your body relaxes. So think about that driver that you see on the interstate that's speeding up and slowing down, speeding up and slowing down. So when you go to sleep, your leg muscles go to sleep and ease off the gas pedal. That's why you never use cruise control. I don't care about the fuel savings. If you're using cruise control and your legs go to sleep and come off the gas pedal, nothing changes, right? I don't care about the fuel savings in the economy. It's false economy if you think a human life is worth less than the MPG savings of fuel with cruise control. So what happens is, think about the leg that goes to sleep, comes off the gas pedal. The same physiology happens with your shoulder muscles that eventually go to sleep, and steering becomes more pronounced and you start to wander in the lane, right? That's why they call those LTL trucks wiggle wagons, right? Because you see those trails wiggle, right? And that's physiology, right? Your steering becomes more pronounced. You think, wow, have I got a flat tire on my kingpins? Maybe I need some more shims on that left side. My steering's not right. You go through all these mind games. And what happens eventually is, and for those watching the show, your eyes kind of close like this. It's a very, slow rate of closure like this for 5 seconds. And it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it takes about 5 seconds for my neck muscles to go to sleep and collapse under the weight of my head. So the nod is the wake up, not the sleep. If you've ever nodded off behind the wheel, you've already been asleep for 300 or 400 feet. Now that's in winter. You're going to see it all up and down the interstates in winter with that truck that drifts off into the median in the snow.
Right.
Right? Right? On the right, if you're in the hammer lane, it's a 40, and what you'll see is when you stop steering because of the crown of the road to run water left and right, if you're in the hammer lane and fall asleep, you drift at 4 degrees into the median. It's a 4-degree drift. If you're in the right-hand lane, it's a 4-degree drift into a guardrail or off the road. And then the head nod happens after that. And generally it's an overcorrection, sharp left hand or right hand down, and the truck rolls over on a straight stretch of road. So that's how they kind of play out on the roads. But the key is not to get there. But I think once I understood that every time my head nodded, I was already asleep for 300 or 400 feet, I suddenly realized that was probably one of the more dangerous things I'd ever done on the road, and hadn't even realized I'd been doing it really until I studied the subject. And I think the scarier thing, though, guys, is about half of the time drivers aren't aware they're having these microsleeps. Because one of the things that disappears when you get tired is short-term working memory. You forget where you are. You forget your exits. You forget you stop doing all of those. You stop looking in your mirrors. So microsleeps are a really dangerous thing. And I would just encourage everybody, if you can get good quality sleep and pull over when you're not tired, you'll find life will be a lot easier. And one of the other things that
a lot longer.
Yeah, we've been tricked into thinking, the pull over when you're tired. No, one day it's going to be too late.
Right.
Pull over when you're not tired, because microsleeps come in waves of an hour and a half, and that's generally when people try and pull up is when they're tired, and that's deadly. So I say to drivers, and this goes against a lot of your intuition, it's hard to pull over when you're not tired.
Right.
But if you pull over when you're not tired, it makes the next low point much easier. And you'll do more miles. So there's a lot to this. I practiced it over millions of miles. If you get this right, you'll be able to run more miles. You'll be on time more often. You'll be a lot happier. You'll be a lot healthier too. And you'll be able to make better choices, because, Chuck, your question about diet's critical. It's hard to make good choices when you're sleep deprived. It's really, really hard. If you get the sleep right, it's much easier to make better decisions.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
All right. Well, Dean, I appreciate you for taking time out again and coming back and joining us.
So generous of you.
A quick time span. I mean, you came right back 2 weeks after we had you on. So I definitely
anytime.
Being so generous with your time. In the meantime, I guess before we let you get out of here, if you want to tell the good folks where they can find you and find your work, we definitely open the floor for that.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Every week we put out a blog post, dat.com/market update as a weekly blog post. Ton of free information on our freight market. You can learn about the spot and contract market, what rates are doing. We've got some pretty good charts there that are all free. You can download a PDF. We don't have a way to convert that into voice just yet, so you can listen to it as you drive, but it's certainly available if you wanted to read it. dat.com/market update. We're on all the social media platforms. Just search for DAT Freight and Analytics. And I think our weekly show is Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern. It's the DAT Freight and Analytics IQ show. You can catch us there also, where we talk about all things freight for flatbed, dry van, and reefer carriers.
All right. We appreciate it once again, Dean. Chuck.
Thank you for joining us and enlightening us and our listeners on sleep. If anybody needs to get hold of me, best way to get hold of me is send me an email, chuck@trafex.com. Include your phone number, and I will either email you back or I will most likely call you back. I prefer to do that. If you need to get set up with Trafex, one of our offices, or you need some help in your business, please feel free to reach out. And with that, Rico, I'll let you back her in a hole for another week.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you guys for taking time out of your schedule to come and hang out with us for a little while. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but we're always grateful and humble that you took a little time to hang with us. With that being said, we want you guys to stay safe, stay healthy. Remember, like, share, subscribe on the video. We need likes, we need shares, and we need subscribers. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell a friend to tell a friend. And until then, and with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say God bless you. Good night. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep it in between the mustard and the mayonnaise.
Catch you on the flip-flop.